great lunch break. And we continue this 43rd annual G. Arthur Keough Lectureship with the topic LGBTQ, Pastoral and Theological Perspectives. And just to remind you that the theme of our summit is LGBTQ, Embracing God's Image and Building a House of Prayer for Every Human. So we had a great session this morning. How many people say amen to that? Amen. And so this afternoon, we now have 2 more sessions. I will now introduce the second session. And the second session is entitled Creating a Safe and Affirming Environment for LGBTQ Persons. The question addressed by the presenter and the panelists: how do we make the Seventh-day Adventist University campus a safe and affirming environment for LGBTQ persons? We have a speaker today, and the speaker is what some call the Seventh-day Adventist super chaplain, Dr. Dilys Brooks. And she's a board-certified chaplain serving Loma Linda University in Loma Linda, California, as a campus chaplain. As a member of the university spiritual care team, she promotes the theological identity of the university, nurturing a multicultural perspective and overseeing the spiritual well-being of faculty, staff, and students. In addition, she's responsible for developing and implementing spiritual care plans, spiritual programming, counseling, and mentoring. Chaplain Brooks is a graduate of the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary at Andrews University with a Master of Divinity degree. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Management from the City University of New York, a Master of Science in Education from Adelphi University, and a Master of Arts in Supervision and Administration from Bank Street College. She's an educator with 11 years of service in Christian and public schools and a PhD, Dr. Brooks, in practical. She now holds a PhD in practical theology at from Claremont Graduate University, my alma mater. She's an emerging scholar interested in pastoral theology, spiritual care, trauma, relational justice, restorative justice, culture, teaching, and pedagogy. Dilys is a partner in life and ministry with Dr. Delroy Brooks, pastor of the Juniper Avenue Seventh Adventist Church in Fontana, California. They're raising their children, Micah and Matea, and their dog, Snow, in Colton. Dilys says she enjoys talking with and praying for others, and then later rejoicing with them for how God has given them the strength and the courage to endure and overcome their challenges. The source of inspiration for her journey has been seek God first, taken from Matthew 6:33. So welcome my homegirl, Dr. Dilys Brooks, who will speak to us today.
Hello, everyone. It is still new being called doctor. It's not even a month yet. But I'm thankful to be here. I have such respect for Dr. Olive Hemmings, and for all of you who've participated and shared your stories this morning, I really appreciate you. You have educated me, given me a whole new vocabulary. We have to sit down and talk about it, this whole A and B business. I felt left out. I said, I thought I knew something. But I really want to engage with you this afternoon on this task of what does it mean to create spaces. So we start with this idea of a how, right? And I think just as everyone this morning kind of located themselves, let me situate myself for you so you understand who I am and where I come from. So I am a cis woman, which means my gender and my sex are in alignment and has always been throughout my life. I was raised in the Caribbean. which means I have a specific way of looking at the world, especially because I come out of the culture which is Jamaican. And if you've met us, you can't forget us. We are something else. I apologize if the experiences have been challenging. And it's partly because of how we were raised. It was what we were taught at a very early age. I grew up in a home with both my parents until I was 9, and then I was raised by a single parent. I am the result of my mother's belief, my mother's prayers, my mother's hard work. Many times she was confused if I was gonna get here. But Mama, we made it. Here we are. I make her proud, and she tells me this all the time. The hallmark of my life were 3 places: church, school, the library. Anybody who has conversations with me knows I'm always reading, and I'm always telling people to go read. That's why you can blame my mother. It was because of my mom's commitment to having my sister and I be in this environment of church, school, and the library that I came to understand that God was real, that God spoke to me, and that I belonged to God. And this was really important for me growing up when my family system got disrupted. And so faith became this place that I understood my identity and where I got to understand how my whole story had value over time. It was because of my faith that and my knowledge of God, that when Jesus told me to become an Adventist, that I did that because I experienced God inviting me to go a little bit deeper. Funny thing people don't know, that when I had my first crisis of faith, it had to do with LGBTQ stuff. I was 19 years old. I was in New York City. I wasn't 19, let me back up. I started college when I was 16. Somewhere between 18 and 19, my Anglican church was looking for a rector. And I was the kind of person who understood the Bible. Like, I read the Bible. I told you where I went: church, school, and the library, right? And so for me, because my thinking was very black and white at the time, which is appropriate for how old I was and how my life was shaped, I discovered that we were looking for, as we were in the process of hiring priests, that same gender loving people were being invited to interview. And so my 18-year-old self was struggling with that because I was like, yo, Romans 1. That's why I'm lucky. I'm so thankful that Dr. Tongstad is going to be talking to us through Romans 1, right? And that was my first crisis of faith. This is not language we often use in Adventism. But as Sister Patty said earlier today, and we talked about it at lunch, all of us, when we are transitioning in our understanding of God, will have spaces that are dark, that are hard, and that are challenging. And for me, my crisis of faith drew me closer to God. It actually had me transition from one way of thinking theologically to another one. This doesn't happen for everyone. Why do I bring this up? Because I work in a college context. And having had my training and professional experience be formed by teaching and taking care of middle school humans, transitioning to a college environment was, I could use and utilize the training that I had teaching other people's children into the college environment. And what happens when people send their children to college is, parents are hoping that what we will do is just polish them off and make them really good and ready for the whole wide world. That's our task. I'm so sorry to tell you that's not my job. My job is actually to help your young adults, especially as they are coming through this time of transition, begin to understand who they are and whose they are. They must figure out their own identities. They've been living in their mom and daddy's house, or their mama's house, or their daddy's house, or their uncles and aunties and grandparents, whatever constellation of family they come from, whatever church community they come from. When they get to college, this is the first time that they are actually going to get an opportunity to begin this work of differentiation. Turn to your neighbor and say differentiation. I'm gonna act like we're in church today. So differentiation is this word we talk about in mental behavioral health. It's where our children are beginning to identify, who am I really? We see differentiation happen when a baby begins to discover that they are themselves and their parents are somebody else. If you've been fortunate to be around young children, you've seen that transition. Differentiation happens again when they go from being dependent on being picked up and they learn independence, right? Differentiation happens again when they get a language and they use that famous word, no, right? So differentiation happens all the way through. Is somebody keeping me on time? I'm sorry, because I really want to be obedient to the assignment. Thank you very much. So we see at 2 years of age, 2, 3, 4, there's this differentiation between mine, me. I don't want to. I do it myself. Have you met them? The humans that do this kind of stuff, right? So that's what's happening at that age. When we get to the teen years, it happens again, and now they have more vocabulary. Hey, and they will use those words. You don't understand me. You don't care about me. We're not like you. So this process goes on all throughout the life cycle. When young adults then come to college, 17, 18, 19 years old, they are now here without their parents. And here's the opportunity for them to really begin to interrogate and think about if what they have been taught their whole life has meaning and has value for them. And Adventist parents specifically get real, my Jamaican friend made up a word, nervous, right? So they get real nervous because what they're hoping is that when we have them leave the Adventist school, they will fall in line and do the things that Adventists are supposed to do. And I'll even go even further and put a qualifier on that, good Adventist. Come on, somebody, because we just don't want Adventists. We want good Adventists, right? So when our young adults show up for college, we already named the fact that they're in a time of transition. We've already named the fact that they're coming, and what's happening to them emotionally, psychologically, mentally has to do with their differentiation and hopefully the beginning of something we like to call integration. This process of beginning to say, I'm going to keep that, I'm going to throw that away, right? Let me see who else I can learn about. And parents and family systems that allow for difference throughout the life of their child, by the time they get to college, they actually have a rich base to make some decisions on. But if they've been sheltered their whole lives and not exposed at all, college is where we say they get turned up, right? Or we say they wilding out because they're trying everything. Well, part of that happens is because we limited everything they've done their whole lives. And then they begin to ask questions. I thought you said, but I heard, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens when folks who have been in these environments that did not allow for difference show up on our college campus and there's all kinds of difference? And what happens when they're different? What do we do? My favorite feminist, Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi, says, the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they aren't true, but that they are incomplete, and they make one story become the only story. So when our children only have one story of God's love, when our children have only one story of what it means to be human, when our children have only one story of who Jesus is, and they come into an environment where that's being questioned, right at the time when they're emotionally dealing with a transition, they've never left home maybe for the first time, mommy's not gonna help them with their laundry. Listen, my son going to college, he don't know how excited I am for him because I'm reminding him about nothing. Because when he leaves, I'm gonna be like, farewell, so long, bye-bye. People don't think I can do it. I'm like, oh, I'm doing the thing. Because I understand that there is something he must step into that space of becoming his own person without the reminders of mom. Right? Now, can I tell you all how we have ruined American children? Can I get on my soapbox for like a second? So remember the helicopter parents? Remember them? You might be in this room. I'm not looking at you. Then the next two sets of parents that have come are the lawnmower parents and the snowplow parents. What have they done? They've removed all obstacles out of their children's paths, right? There's a great book and a website, The Coddling of the American Mind, to fill you in on that. So our young adults who are showing up, who are expecting to step into adult roles, are coming and they've never fallen, really. We're talking about everybody got a prize generation. We're talking about everybody is equal-ish generation, right? So we're talking about not having hardships, not falling down. Remember when they were little and they fell? What do we say? You're okay. But then somewhere in between babyhood into young adulthood, we removed everything out of the way. So they're showing up with single stories and single understandings of what it means to be human, love God, who Jesus is, and they all meet on our campus. And you know, we vote with our idea about what kind of child they're going to be when we send them off to college. We send them to this school because we know they're really going to be good Adventists when they finished. And we're not sending them to that school because they're too fill in the blank. But the task of those who are in charge of spiritual care, the chaplain, the task of the chaplain is not to choose sides, but to be actually Switzerland. The task of the chaplain is to come alongside whichever human shows up, to be non-judgmental, to be loving, generous, and kind, and to support that human through life. My heart was heavy when I heard you say that you contemplated taking your life. That saddened me. Because it doesn't make sense. That story keeps reminding me of how we have people so close to healing and deliverance, but we put obstacles in their way, just like the man at the pool of Bethesda. And we must do better. We should not be putting the obstacles. And I'm preaching. Let me stop preaching and just do this workshop. So if the role of the chaplain is to create a non-judgmental presence, the chaplain's task is to deal with the whole campus. The chaplain's task is not just the students. The chaplain must now engage with the pastoral team and pastoral staff and with faculty. And that's where it gets interesting. Because the reality is, most of us have single stories, but we tell ourselves we do not. And when it comes to LGBTQ persons, we have single stories. We do. And those single stories come out of our own culture. And the foundation of that typically is one of fear. Amen. Floors, walls, and ceilings. The word homophobia, it's got fear in it. When someone is homophobic, they're afraid of someone who has a same gender loving way of being, right? We're afraid. I wonder, however, if what has been passing as homophobia is actually bigotry. That we say we're homophobic, but actually what we are is biased. And we don't even understand how deep the bias goes. One more recommendation, I would encourage you to go on the Harvard website and do the implicit association test. They have a bunch of them, especially one dealing with folks who are queer or gender, right? So part of this work begins with doing a self-assessment. Who am I? This is the work of the chaplain. I'm always asking, who am I? Anytime I'm engaging with somebody. That's what my training teaches me. How am I showing up in this caring experience? So if fear is in the mix, plus we have this single story, do you see the recipe for disaster? Because I'm afraid that if my children are around people who are LGBTQ, that they're going to become it. The last time I checked, it wasn't contagious. I'm making a joke, but I grew up with that. I come from a place where physical harm was done to somebody if they identified as a queer person, and probably still happens, right? But look what happened. Y'all chuckled when I said it because you were just like, does that make sense? It's not contagious, right? But the danger of the story is that it's contagious. If I'm in proximity to someone who is queer, then I might become queer. Single story, dangerous, not true. The second thing that we do is we spiritualize it. We've spiritualized it. And we have said that all LGBTQ people, it's a demon. It's a spirit. And if we just pray it away, it's going to go away. Y'all didn't laugh about that one. But you know that's a true thing. That people believe it's a spiritual thing. Again, a single story. What we need to do on our campuses is to, one, do the assessment of who am I, where am I, what are my feelings, whatever your role is. Come to terms with that and be okay with that. The struggle, though, within Adventist theology is we want to be right. And we want to be perfect. which is not biblical. Can I say that? Jesus didn't ask us to be right or perfect. Neither of those things did he ask. He says, I want you to love God and love your neighbor. He says, on these two hang all the laws. Like, if you want to really get it right, love me and love everybody. Not just who you feel comfortable with or who you understand. So if we're going to create a safe and affirming environment for LGBTQ persons, everyone, spiritual care, folk who do work in mental health, because that's typically where students who identify and or employees who identify in the queer community, they go the route of mental health support because they know nobody else is safe. So everyone has to come and ask the question, how do I think about, what's the story that I have about persons who are queer? Am I even comfortable using the word queer? Like, can we have a real conversation about the fact that, y'all keep changing the letters of the alphabet, then y'all want us to use different words. Like, and I'm saying this to you because that was part of my own journey. And I love future Dr. Paul Anthony talking about the fact that this is a journey. I remembered getting frustrated going, what y'all mean there's a whole other word? I just got used to using these words last week, Alicia. Like, what's going on? And it is. But the challenge is, if I don't even know that I can say that out loud, because the single story I'm telling myself is that I can't sing anything. You see how that's dangerous? The truth of the matter is, if once we assess ourselves and we figure out where we are, because we haven't gotten to the affirming yet, because I first have to start with, where am I? Who am I? What do I believe? Why do I believe that? Where did I learn that from? And become these kinds of critical thinkers where we do this wonderful social deconstruction, social analysis of how did we get here? Then we start looking, is there anybody I can talk to about this? Are there any people around here who I could become an ally with? And I would hope the first place you could go is chaplain's office. But the truth of the matter is, for many of my colleagues and I, we are literally in the hair of the rifle. And so when folks are looking for us to stand up, because if we don't stand up, there's this idea that we're complicit with a system that's against you, they don't always know what's going on, what's happening in the moment. So first, you do an assessment, you learn, you start looking who can you ally with, and then you begin to create opportunities and spaces. You signal to queer folk that these are safe places to come. I'll tell you the journey at Loma Linda. We have a group of students who meet together on a regular basis, and they started meeting together through our behavioral health department. Did not start with the chaplain's office. And I wasn't gonna lie, I felt some kind of way about that because I'm an ally. Like, I've always been one. And so I was just like, well, how come nobody? But then I got over my feelings because at the end of the day, it's not my story. It's not my issue. And the truth of the matter is, if students went that route, it was probably because they had been hurt by the church people. And they weren't sure or didn't know that they could talk to their chaplain. My role is to then, my function as a chaplain is to then become the kind of person who listens and tells stories. And that's what we've done at Loma Linda. We listen and we tell stories. So when I hear somebody's story, I go and I share it at a faculty meeting. I go and share it in a staff meeting. I share it with our offices and our president. And we happen to have a president who believes in telling stories, and he tells all the stories. And we have people come and say, this is how I felt, this is what I experienced. And do you know what happens when you start to hear additional stories? Empathy gets created. I heard somebody at lunch talking, I think it was Daniel Sisto, saying, talking about one of my favorite other humans, Brian Stevenson, and I want to quote something he said. He said, we must get proximate to suffering and understand the nuanced experiences of those who suffer from and experience inequality. He says, if you are willing to get closer to people who are suffering, you will find the power to change the world. That's why we have to begin with assessing our own biases, assessing our motivations. Why don't we want to engage in this conversation? And like I said, it's typically fear. And the fear is associated with this idea of he's either catching, right? It's going to jump off and get me. It's a spiritual thing. And then the last one, which we didn't talk about, is if I acknowledge queer people as people, then somehow or the other, I am breaking God's commandments. And I want to know which one. I'm going to give y'all 60 seconds of my precious time. Y'all don't need 60 seconds. So it's not the commandments that we're going to break. We're going to go against the norm. Our normative church culture. Our normative social order. Because socially, we have been taught and practiced marginalization of those who are not normative. Yes or no? That's how we're socialized. So we do the self-assessment. We learn and identify who are people that we can become allies with. We then communicate to folks who are queer that your story will be listened to here, and we will journey with you here. Then you learn how to advocate for, like I do. I advocate, I speak up on behalf of, I name and I identify and I challenge and I question and I go, I hear you saying this. How does this, however, go with what we say we want to do? But ultimately, creating a safe space is about community. It's about creating an opportunity and a space for queer folks to know that they are not alone. Now, in hearing my esteemed presenters this morning, especially those who identify as queer, like really call out to us that love is not a word, it's an action. In other words, love is not a noun, it's a verb. And it's more than just saying I love you. Love has to actually look like something, right? The elephant in the room for me is that our theology names the fact that we serve a God who made all human beings in God's image and likeness. Yes. We say that this God is a God who functions in community and who wants to be in community. No, we don't say that? I mean, I just want to make sure, like, we're in the same place. So we say, we then have our fundamentals that articulate all the way through how this ought to look. So we agree that people want to be known and loved, that people want to belong. Would we say that? And then we decide who gets to be known, who gets to be loved, and who gets to belong. And then we say it's because God would want us to do that. And my honorable future Dr. Barrientos challenged us this morning about reality and about what does it really look like to be in the world? What is the world? And what does the kingdom of God look like? It should be pushing back against every system that keeps people on the margins. It should be pushing back against every system that limits instead of includes. And we should all agree it is messy, and we're going to get it wrong more than we're going to get it right. But we cannot be so focused on getting it right all the time that we do nothing. I stand here as a cis woman. I said that. And I am a part of a sexual minority in the Adventist church. I am. Not because of what you know. Because I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And we don't talk about that either. And the statistics say that there are 1 in 3 women in the United States of America who have experienced sexual assault before the age of 18, and 1 in 6 men. So I want to say to my queer brothers and sisters that we must work together. And I'm standing here as a minority, as a black woman, a woman who cannot get credentials outside of Potomac and Chesapeake and all these places, right? I mean, I am in Southern California, but my school is a GC school, right? And I'm cool, because I don't work for the church. I work for Jesus. Just so y'all know, I'm good, right? But I want to bring to your attention that there are multiple systems of marginalization that are at work, and that we must all work together. Because if we do not work together, then what ends up happening is we keep creating these stratas. And unfortunately, as a black woman, I can tell you, I find myself getting close to the door every time. And so part of the resistance that you will hear and you will experience as we engage on this topic is, who's the person you're talking to, and do you know their story? Because sometimes their resistance to what you're to the experience is because we don't know their marginalized story either. And so them feeling like, oh, we don't want to be around people who are queer, might be because they were sexually abused and they've never talked about it and they've never dealt with it. And so every time they see it, they get triggered. Are you hearing me? It might be that they themselves are still struggling with their own identity. And when you show up with your freedom, they're reminded that they're not free. And they don't know how to handle it because they don't know who they can talk to. So often when we're in these spaces together, there's such a mixed multitude, y'all. And I will leave you with this. If we're going to create these safe spaces, it begins with us doing a self-assessment and identifying, where am I? Who am I? What am I doing? Like, how do I feel about this? Where did I learn these things? Do that kind of deep work to identify, find some people, get to know people. Proximity creates empathy. If you look in your network and you don't know anybody that's queer, fix that. Because you need to get to know their stories. If there are other minorities in your community that's missing from your community, then you need to do that work. Why aren't these voices here? As Daniel Sisto said today, the fact that we have queer people in this conversation this weekend means that we're hearing somebody else's story other than me getting up here telling you stories about other people's stories, so that we can be proximate to their suffering and their experiences. Then, we respectfully tell everyone that we are opting on the side of the Palestinian Jewish man named Jesus Christ, who says, we love God and we love people, period. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. Now we will enter into discussion, so we'll have a panel discussion, and our university chaplain, campus chaplain, Pastor Jason Dietz, will lead that conversation.
All right, thank you. If our panelists for this next 30 minutes would come forward and have a seat, and we will get started. If you could pass the microphone to Dr. Johnson. Thank you. Once again, my name is Jason. I am the university chaplain, and as we get into this part of the discussion, I want to go down our line of panelists and just real briefly tell us your name and just introduce yourself for maybe those who are just joining us, or, yeah. So we'll start with you, Dr. Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. There we are. Good afternoon. I'm Ralph Johnson, and I serve as the Vice President of our Center for Student Life here at Washington Adventist University. I've been in higher education, specifically student affairs, for about 40 years on different campuses across the Southeast.
Hi. I was still getting myself together. My name is Paul Anthony Turner. I'm a PhD student in philosophy at University of Kentucky, and I'm a pastor, and I'm gay.
Hello, my name is Beverly Gordon. I am the chair of the psychology department here at Washington Adventist University. My background is in nursing, psychology, counseling, and higher education.
Good afternoon. My name is Bogdan Skur, and I'm a professor in the Department of Religion at Washington Adventist University.
My name is Olive Hemmings. I'm chair of the Department of Religion at Washington Adventist University. I want to say specifically that I'm Jamaican. I was born and raised in Jamaica, and that's significant to this conversation because I grew up in a culture that is extremely queerphobic, or homophobic is a former term for that. And and just growing up in that culture, I just assumed that that these were evil people, awful people. Just an assumption. I never had any reason to examine until I actually encountered a young man who came to me on the college campus I was teaching one day. Beautiful young man, I liked him very much. As he sat beside me, I put my hand over his shoulder, and he just began to cry. He said, "What's going on?" And he said to me, "I want to come and speak with you in your office." He came to me, to my office. He wanted me, long and short, to pray away his gayness. And I sat eye to eye, knee to knee with him. For the first time, maybe I really looked at somebody. I looked at him, not looked across or somewhere. I saw him. And I knew there and then that I understand it from experience. This is not something I can pray away. And we had a long relationship on that campus of I learning a lot from him, he learning a lot from me, and it was quite an experience of humility, talking about namaste, that it really brought me to a place of humility and changed my entire teaching approach and hermeneutic. And I was very privileged for that. I think God gave me that experience.
Thank you, Dr. Hemmings. My first question, we're talking about a safe and affirming environment for LGBTQ plus persons. What does, and this is for any panelist who wants to chime in on this, what does a safe and affirming environment on a university campus look like, and does that look different for LGBTQ plus individuals?
I think I'd like to start this because I really want to help frame and contextualize support for all students from a student affairs, student development perspective. I think it's already been established by our previous speaker that when our students are coming to our college campuses, primarily as freshmen, but even as transfer students, they are still developing. They're still forming who they are. We have student development theories that talk about all of those developmental processes and what the students are experiencing as they are engaging in these learning crises. Because we know that as student affairs professionals, we anticipate the kinds of things we need to have in place to support their transition into our campus communities. And that has led us over the years to create various functional areas in student affairs. For example, Res Life programs, career services programs, counseling programs, multicultural student affairs programs, student activities, and all of those things are created because we anticipate what students are going to struggle with as they're coming into our institution. These things are also in place because we want to help the student feel safe, comfortable, and affirmed in our campus communities. So out of that grows a number of opportunities for institutions to show that students are welcomed and that they belong. All those buzzwords that we are talking about now, belongingness, really have been around since the beginning of higher education across the world. But our job is to help those students do that. Why? Because we want to, number one, affirm who they are and their humanity, but also because we want to make sure that they are successful in their overall development, because it leads to the success of their academic development, if that makes any sense. And so what I'm saying is that what it looks like is creating these programs and support services to help students make that successful transition so that they are overall successful and complete their college degree and move on to other things. On many campuses, that also looks like what kinds of programs, activities, support groups do we allow on, and notice, and I use the word allow intentionally, allow on our campuses in order to help those students feel safe and affirmed. The affinity groups and support groups, all of that should be manifestations of how we show support and encourage students to do well. I have a lot more to say, but I want to give other folks time to respond.
I actually want to go back to a point that Alicia made when she was speaking, where she talks about, is the priority for our institutions integrity or reputation? I think it's a really good way to frame this conversation, because if our concern is our reputation, we're going to continue to have the kinds of initiatives or the lack of initiatives that we've seen in our Adventist institutions. But if we're coming from a place of integrity, we're going to see, I believe, a proliferation of opportunities for LGBT people to thrive. When I was at, I shouldn't say the name, but when I was at Andrews University, there we are, and when I was at Southern, I had the privilege of being on various committees and being part of different initiatives that impacted or supported LGBT people. I'll speak about one that happened at Andrews, Haven, which is an LGBT support group at Andrews that started up 3 or 4 years ago or so. And I had the privilege of being one of the student leaders for it. And there were a lot of hurdles and hoops that we had to jump through just to get the group started. One of the hurdles that we had to maneuver was calling the group a support group instead, a care group rather, instead of a support group. Because we want to care for LGBT people, but we can't support them because if we say we support, we might be condoning a lifestyle. And it's this kind of attention to minutia that registers with LGBT people as a general lack of care for us, where it's not about the integrity of the institution coming from a place of honor and nobleness, but rather coming from a place of trying to save face and keep the constituents from being upset. And there is I don't call it a balance, but there is some kind of a dance that has to be done there, and I recognize that our administrators have to do that. However, it's often the case that when our administrators pay more attention to constituents and to those who have the money and who have the power, that LGBT people end up with the lashes on their backs. And so what I would love to see for our Adventist institutions is running so headlong after integrity that those who would be naysayers cannot but come along. I don't know how to go about doing that. I'm not an administrator. That's for people like y'all who do that kind of work. You know what I mean? That's for whoever the administrators are. I recognize. I don't have that experience. I don't have that wisdom, but I do have the wisdom of whatever I have as a pastor and as an LGBT person, what I would have liked to see when I was leading this care group that wanted so badly to be called a support group, but couldn't because they were afraid that what the constituents might say. So that's what I would say. Let's aim for integrity over reputation, and I think that the naysayers won't have much to say.
You know, one of the things that I really, really like about Christianity is that I find it's very simple. And the previous speaker mentioned a concept that I very much embrace. The idea that with all the sophisticated words that we can use, with all the many initiatives that we can put in place, it really boils down to 2 things: love to God and love to man. So in my mind, I believe that God created all people. I believe that all people bear the image of God. And so this concept, this fundamental Christian concept of love to God and love to man, it really simplifies things and it makes life richer for all people. So my thought is, I don't know necessarily a specific program that needs to be initiated, but first of all, I know that we need to have a self-knowledge that understands who we are in relation to God and who everybody else is in relation to God. And when we can see each human being as someone created in the image of God, it really simplifies life. I don't know why we want to classify each other by labels that then, these labels then limit us. Labels are useful in organizing our thoughts, but labels are not useful when we use them to destroy each other. And so I believe that the fundamental principle of love to God, love to man, and authenticity. So authenticity kind of supports something that you were saying. I forgot your name, sorry. Paul. But yes, you were saying something about considering integrity rather than image, right? So if I'm not too concerned about how I look, how I sound, you know, who agrees with me or who doesn't agree with me, other than my fundamental belief in the value of all human life, created in the image of God, that principle guides the actions that I then take.
Well, as we say, the big elephant in the room is that our institution's reputation is foremost. It's more important than the individual well-being. But I think one thing that I think a real caring college, one that sees a student not looking at them and seeing tuition fees, but rather look at them and see people that are going through a journey of life and that we need to nurture them and carry them in this part of the journey, this 4 years or however many years they have to walk through this journey. And I think that every university, whatever department is responsible for that, must become aware of the presence of queer persons on the campus and let them know that we want to see you for who you are. If we know this person is queer, we can say, I see you, we see you. We want to nurture you. We want to help you through your struggles. This is not about endorsing lifestyle or all those discussions that we enter into just so that we can excuse ourselves from really reaching out to fellow humans and loving in profound ways. So that is perhaps the first step. Can we say to the queer persons on our campus, we see you and we want you to know that we want to help you through this journey, this difficult journey that every queer person has to take in this life. We need to understand that and perhaps develop that kind of program.
As an educator, my soul longs for conversations of what happens when Jesus Christ moves into our classrooms. When grace of God takes over our pedagogy, our advising, our mentoring. We don't often talk about that question. Justifiably so, institutions are preoccupied by their survival. Financial pressures are enormous, especially in post-COVID times. Millions of students decided not to come to college after COVID, period. So financial pressures are enormous. And some of the questions arise in their importance in our conversations, in our discussions, debates, plannings. But my soul always craved for discussions and debates and thinking and reflection. What difference does Jesus Christ makes for our classrooms? And for me, a place of welcome, I mean, funny that I talk about place of welcome. I should listen more, what other people feel about that. But as a Christian, as a confessing Christian, for me, the place of welcome begins with the radical hospitality of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ expressed ontological solidarity with us. He took upon human flesh. He became part of a specific culture, specific way of life. And for me, a welcoming place must always begin with that radical hospitality of Jesus Christ. We cannot do better than following the example of Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ welcomed everyone and extended welcome to everyone. Jesus Christ said, follow me, right? I will teach you, I will lead you. I will take you to the place you need to be, but follow me. So that is something that I feel is the beginning of conversation for us. A couple of years ago, our university administration graciously purchased for every employee of Washington Adventist University book, Relationship-Rich Education. And it's a wonderful book. It's a powerful book, and I brought my computer with me because I wanted to read a quote from that book that was really profoundly moving quote for me. COVID-19 is a powerful reminder that educational institutions, from preschool to universities, are not only places for learning and growth, they are also the bedrock for many students' physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, and for some of the most important relationships in their lives. So I wrote after that sentence, I am a first-hand witness that for some of our students, the university is as close to a family as they can get. So we have to count with that reality. If you come from a privileged demographics, this reality doesn't quite resonate with you in the same way. But I was profoundly moved by this quote. So if classroom, if office, if university space, it's such a foundational, formational place for our students, how do we then steward that opportunity in our relationship with students?
I don't know what your second question is, so I was...
The initial question was,
Right.
what does a safe and affirming environment look like on campus, and does that look different for LGBTQ plus persons?
Yeah, I appreciated all the comments made by my co-panelists, and I wanted to circle back to something that the future Dr. Paul Anthony Turner, I was like saying your whole name. I just want you to know that. Thank your parents for me. He talked about this idea of choosing integrity over reputation, and I long for a day when integrity and reputation are important. Because I think we need to move toward both and, not an either or. I think we should be known as a place where all people are welcome, where we are a house of prayer for all people. And I think people will come, right? So this idea of scarce resources, right? Because when you said it, I heard the administrators in my head going, man of God, you talking about choose integrity? Folks' salaries out here on the line, and that's the reality. Like, we don't get paid a whole lot of money in the church school, right? So it is definitely an aspiration that we want to get to the place where integrity is where we are, but it's not an either or for me. I think it's a both and. We should be places of integrity, and we have a reputation that says we're a place of integrity where LGBTQ folk are welcome. So if we are talking about what it looks like from the perspective, I hear you talking about words. And then I thought about a phrase that a colleague of mine, Dr. Linda Bredvik, used, where she talked about linguistic hospitality. And I had it in my side notes, I didn't get to it, but words matter. If we don't practice linguistic hospitality, which is, what does it mean when you say affirm? Like, we have to have that shared vocabulary. So when I hear affirm, I find I got a pulse right here in my neck, because I don't know what you mean when you say that. You know what you mean. So linguistic hospitality for me then is to then say, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, Alicia, that when you use affirm, that we might be on the same page. What I'll ask you to do is say more. When we talk about support versus, what was it? Care, right? Part of being, what I have learned, being in these really, really grown folk streets, right? Because I think I'm an adult, but then there's grown folks, is understanding that sometimes we have to walk softly. Sometimes we have to be as wise as serpents, as harmless as doves. There are some spaces we can go into and immediately start the conversation with support, if the ground has been prepared. And there are other places you go, and I'll give you an example. We've printed 5,000, what number did I say, everybody? 5,000 little labels that we were going to give around campus for faculty and staff to put on their doors, and all it said was safe place. There were no rainbows. There was nothing. And if you knew the language, right, we were saying, here are safe people. Ask me if any of those ever saw the light of day. All 5,000 got tossed. Because there was a concern that it would seem as if we were affirming lifestyle. And so the question we asked when this happened, we were like, whoa. I thought we were in the business of caring for everyone who comes to our campus. And we want to make sure there's no suicide on our watch. We want to make sure there's nothing happening here that is harmful for any person. But because that phrase made some people think that we were doing this, it hurt. It hurt hard. And the way that the whole thing went down was, it just did not go over well. And yet, a few years later, last year, we acknowledged LGBTQ people on our campus. And it was kind of like, and we've caught a lot of stuff for it. So why do I bring this up when I talk about linguistic hospitality? It is so important when we engage with the people we're talking to that we are sharing the same language, that when we engage in conversation, that we give each other another fancy word you've been using today, hermeneutic of grace, a hermeneutic of charity, of wanting to say to this person, we may butt heads until we get to a place where we're in agreement or where we understand each other. And so often, because we won't talk about the elephant, and I'm just going to name the elephant right now, we are more concerned, and we have been concerned as a Christian church, big C, and definitely lowercase c Adventist, with who gets to have sex and still be called a Christian. Y'all not going to agree with me? That's really what's going on, right? Isn't that A-B business y'all were talking about? Yes. That's really what we're having a conversation about, what we're not having a conversation about. So talking about linguistic hospitality, when someone says, I'm for queer people, but not their lifestyle, I'm like, I don't even understand what you're talking about. If you put lifestyle in a sentence for me, we're no longer in, it's not hospitable for me anymore. Because we don't talk about heteronormative lifestyle. And as my good sister pastor said today, heteronormative people do some heinous things, and they still have jobs.
Very true.
Lions and bears and tigers.
I'm so glad that we have a panel of really deep thinkers who have a lot to say on this subject, because you make my job as a moderator very easy. As we wrap up this discussion, unfortunately, I had so many more questions to ask, but I feel that the conversation and the direction that it went was very enlightening and very positive and productive. And so as we wrap up this segment on affirming and safe spaces on Adventist University campuses, just quick 30 seconds as we go down the line. How much? We still have 30 minutes? Yo, this is great.
Well,
Let's
perfect.
keep going then.
Can I
didn't
say
know.
something real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We,
Can I just say one quick thing, because this is so important. I put a pin in something earlier, if you all recall. I said I'll come back to why I used that word, allow. So what I've been taught my entire career, professionally, even as a student, is that a college or a university is a marketplace of free ideas. Exactly. And at the same time, we don't see that always manifested. If it is indeed a marketplace of free ideas, then ideas should be welcomed, that whether we as a person agree with them or not. And in that context, I think it's important for us to understand that there has to be diversity in a university community or a college community for there to be a true marketplace of free ideas. And that the opportunity for people to come to the table and express who they are, what they think, and how they think it should be welcomed for everyone, irrespective of any other things that come along with that voice. And I think that's important for us to understand. Now, many colleges and universities have finally gotten it right, where they are able to separate what is allowed at the table versus what's endorsed. And I think part of our hang-up is that we think that if we allow a marketplace of free ideas as an institution, that somehow we or others externally will think that's what we endorse. And I think we have to get beyond that and understand that if we are going to create a space for all individuals to come to this table and express who they are, what they feel and what they think, that should be okay without us feeling somehow burdened that whatever it is they're saying, the public or the constituents or others are going to think that's what we endorse. And that gets to your point to agree about care versus support. We've got to get past that to say we have a diversity represented on our campus through our students, through our employees, and there's a right for those expressions to be at the table if we are truly an institution of higher education.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have other questions, but I see Pastor Alex has a question. And anybody else who has questions here, we have a number online as well. But Alex, if you have a question.
Usually, some conversations in regards to higher education, LGBT communities, in regards to just the existence of communities, usually are seen as, and sorry for my French or English, usually a white conversation, and usually higher paid, salary conversations, powerful conversations, and intellectual conversations. I'm wondering that maybe Dr. Brooks, tell me what's the ambiance of a university being a place of anti-intellectualism, and also that reality of communities that engage with the very university tends to, or intends to, find that education.
Ms. Dillis, if you could repeat the question as you understand and seek to answer it. Yes.
Dr. Brooks. So what I think you're hearing saying, future Dr. Barrientos, is I think you are asking the question, how does this conversation land for folks who may come out of another social class and or ethnic group that is not majority and intellectual and access to finances? Yeah? Okay. So in my particular institution, we work side by side. We're all there together on campus, right? And so what I hear often is this concern. People don't usually come to me, but they definitely go to our president. And they will talk to our president about, hey, you taught us, missionaries came and taught us, this is what we were taught. what are y'all doing? This is wrong, right? You all want to be so progressive and you want to move forward, but you're leaving a large swath of us behind, and we just don't understand it. That's what it looks like. There is tension between the two groups because it's seen, and it's not just on our campuses, it's also globally, right? The global South is looking at us and saying, that's not happening here. Y'all can do whatever y'all want over there in the North Americas and Europe, but hey, it's not gonna happen here. So that's what we hear when we are in public spaces. However, when I am with people from the global South, and I am talking to folks who are doing ministry, they're saying to me, hey, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to help these young adults, these younger children? How do we help them navigate what is a very dangerous and lonely place? And my response usually is become the safe place, become the safe person. Create that opportunity for someone to know it's safe here. We have Taco Tuesdays at our house every Tuesday. If you're ever in California, holler, let me know, Southern California. It's open to everybody. One of my queer friends, I have had the privilege of being a part of her life. From her straight passing, getting married, identifying herself as not being okay in that particular relationship, naming that she was same gender attracted, all the way now to coming out as a queer person. And I remembered what a privilege it was to be in that journey with her. And she would often say, your house is my church. Tuesday nights are Sabbath for me. And so for those of us who happen to be in communities where we're around colleges or schools, part of what we get to do is to create a space that is safe. Just as Dr. Bogdan is your first name, Skur. The things I could do with that last name. Oh my gosh, it's such a fun name, I love it. Dr. Skur said that for so many people, the university is home. We have people who can't go home, right, at holiday times. And so I would challenge faculty and staff to be aware of that. And to go back to Pastor Alex's question, to me, here's the other part of it too. I get to sit with the people who don't agree and let them know it's okay. I get to sit and say, tell me how you really feel. Because so many people feel like they can't tell you how they can't be honest about, I'm confused, I don't understand. And I was saying it at lunch. When I was navigating my own understanding about LGBT plus concerns, I had students who would come to my house, we would chop it up over some food, and they would go, Pastor Dillis, this is what this means. And I'm like, that don't make no sense. And they would go, I know it doesn't make sense to you, Pastor Dillis, but it's what we're learning in class. And I'd be like, ugh, because I knew what was happening to me was I had to grow. My current frustration right now, some of my queer folks in the room, is wanting to make the word folk, F-O-L-X, because I come from a British country. This idea of taking the K and making it an X is a little problematic for me. I'll get over it eventually, right? But this is what I'm talking about. You need to find a place.
Yeah, I don't do that.
Right, so and I'm so glad you said that, because part of the conversation with a single story is that all queer people agree on all things that have to do with queerness. They do not, right? They don't. So those of us who have the energy and can, I think we need to make sure in communities where there are minority voices, in the sense that it seems like the majority of the campus is pro-queer folk and pro-justice and pro all the things that are supposed to be in vogue, that we make room for people who are not, to know it's okay, that we still love you, you still get to be here. And we will sit and we will listen. Just as I wouldn't ask a queer person to sit and hold that space though. Does that make sense? I wouldn't ask someone queer to sit with someone who is anti-queer to try to process that, because that's too much emotional labor. But I can, right? Just as some conversations as a Black woman I'm not gonna have with someone who is not Black when we're talking about issues of equity and so on and so forth. But I'm glad you brought it up, because everybody's not here and everybody's not convinced. And definitely the people who aren't on the lower socioeconomic classes or come out of immigrant backgrounds, there's a longer haul is going to take. And they need to know that they're also welcome.
So being affiliated with an organization, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that is primarily opposed to LGBTQ plus values, lifestyle, etc., is it possible for those who have deeply held values and beliefs that are opposed to LGBTQ plus values and so forth, is it possible for them to be affirming, supportive, and even advocates without compromising their own beliefs and values? And if so, how can an administrator or a student or even a constituent, how can they support, affirm, even advocate without compromising their own belief or value?
Sir, point of order.
Point.
I would like to ask you, you said values, lifestyle, what was the other thing you said? Beliefs? No, you said...
Wait, no, so you're talking about individuals...
No. You just, the question you just raised, what I heard you say was that queer folk have different values than heteronormative folks.
Right, so the question...
Yeah.
I'm not affirming what that statement was, I'm
Okay.
just acknowledging
Question again,
the
yeah.
question. Right. So the question is, for those individuals in the church affiliated with an organization, administrators that are outspokenly opposed to LGBTQ values or lifestyle, what is it possible for them to still hold their belief and be supportive? And if it is so, how do they go about doing that?
I was thinking, sometimes we tend to, this thing about labels again, I have a big thing about labels, because sometimes we tend to put a label and then we put people under those labels, and then we think that, for example, in psychology we talk about abnormal behavior, and we say the schizophrenic. Actually, it's a person with schizophrenia. So I have a little difficulty in trying to figure out why we can't think about people just as people, human beings. And so if we're all human, we all have basic human needs. We might have different opinions about different things, so we might disagree on certain points or whatever, but I don't understand why I can't support, care for, love someone just because they have a different opinion. They might have the same values. They might even have the same beliefs, actually, because I believe there are some good Seventh-day Adventist people who would identify themselves as queer. So we might have all of that in common, but we want to focus on the thing that we don't have in common. I wonder if it would be helpful if we could have a common denominator, human being. And then, we take all the human beings with all their various differences and their similarities and find a way to work together as human beings, because I do believe that John 3:16 says, and I'm no theologian, but it says, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, so that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So my tendency is to want to allow God to do the judging part of all those details, because I don't know all the answers, but he does. And how about if we try to get along as human beings? Because this is what Jesus prayed for. He wanted his believers to love one another, and as we love each other, we demonstrate that we are part of God's kingdom. So I might be simple-minded, but I just have a little problem with the idea of kind of stratifying people into these boxes, because you see, I've had the experience of being put in a box. I've had the experience several times of being put in a box, and it doesn't feel good, because actually I'm a child of God. I'm created in his image. And I think everybody, every human being is a child of God created in his image. Let's start there. Let's start where God starts with us. Let's see ourselves. Okay, so we're an institution of higher education. But first of all, we're a Christian institution of higher education. And so that word Christian ought to mean something. I think it means follower of Christ. And so as followers of Christ, we ought to represent Christ, whether we are an individual or an institution of individuals. And I really want to emphasize that a lot, because it's a big problem. I think a person is a person. As a nurse, when I took care of people, somehow I couldn't quite find too many differences. You know, basically our anatomy and physiology is essentially the same. And the way our brains work, now that I'm in psychology, I mean, you know, there are some differences, but we are essentially human. If there are things that are different, some of the reasons why there are differences, we don't even know the answers yet. So why do we want to judge it from a moral perspective and put people in a situation? All human beings have the same basic human needs. And I think that if we start there and represent and recognize each other as children of God, creatures created in the image of God, whether we're male or female, black or white, whatever that text said, whoever the theologians are, you can fix it up for me.
Particular to your question, I think that it should be fine for individuals to support and affirm humans, irrespective of their walks of life and irrespective of the fact that they may not be aligned with your own, because we're called upon to do that. I don't know why this text hit me, but simple text. Micah 6:8. What does it say? What doth the Lord require thee? But to what? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before our God. That alone should compel us to be able to reach our hand out and support anyone who needs help, affirmation, support, compassion, love mercy, do justice. I think all of us, especially under the banner of Christianity, must follow God's command.
I want to talk about two things. The first thing is to address what I think Dr. Brooks was trying to get at with the point of order is when the question was asked, how do we deal with when people work in an institution where they have different values, thank you for writing this down, different values, different lifestyles and beliefs. A few things there. LGBT people do not have a lifestyle. We just have lives. We just live. We don't have a styling of life any more than straight people have stylings of lives. Our values are no different than straight people's. I mean, contextualized to us as queer people, we might have certain values that are different. But as far as it's like a baseline human values, we're very much the same. Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify what I believe Dr. Brooks was trying to get at there.
So real quickly, the question was about those who hold, say, administrators or other people who have values that wouldn't align with other individual values. So I appreciate you clarifying, though, that the values is across the board and humanity and lifestyle is all a part. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that, yes.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And the other thing is I wanted to talk about so how do we walk and I believe it is a fine line of, on the one hand, wanting to affirm that we are all human, and at the same time recognizing that we all live existentially in the world as the particular kinds of individuals that we are. We all have our own histories, we all have our own experiences, and that's part of to borrow the term the professor used earlier, it's part of our ontology, it's part of our very being, our very makeup is our histories, our experiences. Those things are not something that can be ripped out of us so that we can just look at the pure humanity that exists in each of us. Each one of we all have a shared humanity in that, yes, we are all human. But my humanity as a queer person is a queer humanity. It is very different from a straight humanity. And so it's not actually possible, and it's even destructive to a certain degree, if we say, why can't we just affirm the person? I remember when I was being persecuted, and when I say persecuted, I truly do mean persecuted, my family and I, and me back in 2020 in March, January through May, really, where my church of 10 plus years began to persecute me and my family for me being gay. My pastor said, I wish you had just stayed in the closet. I didn't need to know you were gay in order to attend to you. I could have just, I'm gonna finesse it a little bit here and maybe embellish it a little bit. I could have dealt with you in your basic humanity without attending to your being a queer person. But part of myself, to be Paul Anthony Turner and as a human, is to be queer. It's ontologically who I am. It's my existential nature. So I get the point, the sentiment of wanting to get at the core and recognize that everyone is a human. That's great. We want to be careful, however, to recognize how going too far down that road might very quickly run into us whitewashing people and treating everyone like they're a blank slate, which then it becomes oppressive. Now, I know that's not what anyone at this table would want, but I'm just suggesting that any time in history that we have done those kind of grand over-sweeping, everyone's kind of the same, we have swept over women's concerns, women's bodies. We have swept over transgender concerns, black folks' concerns, Latinx folks' concerns, etc. So let's attend to the fact that we're all just human by respecting the fact that we are all unique in our humanity and we all have different unique needs. I think that will help administrators who are struggling with how do I relate with LGBT people with whom I might disagree on certain things? How do I relate with them? As the professor has said, we need to recognize first that everyone is human. And as everyone is human, everyone has their own articulation of their humanity, and we need to be specific and nuanced in our approaches to each one of those individual humans.
Did somebody else want to? So what I think is it's so interesting when we keep the conversation around beliefs, lifestyles, or values is that we don't take the next step to what it means to be a Christian person who is queer, or a Christian person who is black, or a Christian, right? Like, because when we put the delimiters before Christian as opposed to put Christian first, then whatever the other things are, then we run into problems. Because if Jesus' commandment is that in his kingdom, the kingdom that God has come to preach and to inaugurate in the world is where everybody is welcome. No one gets to be left out. I then have to struggle with, but I don't like those people, and I don't particularly agree with them. And Jesus goes, cool. I might actually have you sit next to them so you can work that out, Dillis. I'm like, Jesus, put me in the back, right? So I'm longing for the conversation, especially because Paul Anthony Turner, the future doctor, said, this idea of integrity and reputation, I want us to practice a Christian integrity that says everyone is welcome in their uniqueness and in the things that are similar. Everyone is welcome. And we will have a reputation of being a place where everyone is welcome. Everyone will know that, and we will know that no one gets turned away. I am looking for someone in the New Testament that Jesus called out. I want to find me a person that Jesus talked about what they had done and who they were. Thank you. The only people Jesus calls out are the people who thought they got it right. And the thing about us as Adventists, and I love us to death, we are so human. We are so human. We want to be right. We want everything to be black and white. And as my good pastor, sister friend said today, there's so many shades of gray. And we don't want to deal with the gray because we are longing for Jesus to come. And somehow or the other, when the Lord comes, we just won't have to talk about all the stuff that makes us uncomfortable. Meanwhile, here we are, trying to figure this out together. Christian changes everything.
Let me go. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'd like to rephrase your question and see how the panel might respond to that. I would like to rephrase the question, particularly for the straight cisgender members of the panel. If you were to go to a church and be singled out and told you may not have a family, you may not have a partner, you may not have children with that partner, to what degree could you be accepted within that community? And to what degree could you not be accepted within that community?
So in other words,
Could you
if I
repeat the question and then answer it?
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
kind of what yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood what you said. And what I hear is that you're asking us to put ourselves in the position, in the place of someone who is queer. And because those are some of the things that they experience, how would I feel if I experienced it?
If you were told
Yes.
specific things I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. So if I was told that I could not get married, I could not have a family with the person that I wanted to have a family with. Was there a third one?
Yes. And how could you feel accepted in that community?
Would I feel accepted in that community?
Limits, how could you be accepted? How could you not be accepted?
Okay. So I couldn't. That's a short answer. I could not. Because as someone else has said earlier on, that although we are all human, and I really didn't mean to give the impression that I thought that everybody should be treated, without taking consideration who they actually are as individuals. That wasn't my point. But anyway, it would be impossible for me to live the life that God has given me, and it would be impossible. I don't even know how to expand on it because it would just be impossible. I could not be accepted because if the very basic needs that I would have as a human being are denied, how could I possibly be accepted? And I do have some sense of that, by the way, having come to this country back in 1979 and walking into a church thinking, oh, it's an Adventist church, yay. Walking into the church and then finding out that I was being told that there was another church XY miles down the road that I would probably feel more comfortable in. So I do know what that feels like. It's a different context, but it's the same kind of feeling. So there's just no way to answer that question in any positive way. I could not survive in that church. I could not be accepted. I would immediately, my soul would be crushed.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. As we have 2 minutes left, I have. We have 2 minutes left. So what I would propose is just getting with the panel offline and asking that question, but as we go down in the last 2 minutes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, take it.
Can we take just one question from online? Just to be inclusive, we're running over time.
So that one that was asked was from online.
Oh, that one was online.
Yeah, that's what, yeah. I have other ones that if you really want to get into it and see what people are saying, we could do that.
Yeah, we know that.
Are you sure? I filtered it's a soggy, it's a sloppy question, but I did my best to express it in a way that is somewhat palatable and still being true to the integrity of the question that was asked. Do you want another?
But I saw your hand was going up consistently, Pastor Gann. Are you still?
Sure.
wondering. So I am side B, to use that term, like to the point where I almost lost my job because I stood up for a person who I think needed to be, who was our music leader, Sabbath school teacher, and all of this thing, and the board was like, you know, kindly leave, right? And I was like, that's not okay. So affirming the person, and I just kind of wanted to give that as a background. But I'm struggling with, I guess, the side A and the issue of, I guess, of morality. So, because what I'm hearing is affirming is to say, not just say, like, I love you and I want you to be here. It's also to say, I want you to be fully who you are, as if, like, having relationships or children or whatever is what makes us fully whole people. And so the question that raises in my mind is that, you know, part of the issue for me kind of stems from this question of, I guess, sexual morality is defined in Scripture, especially if, you know, we talked earlier about, like, eschatology and sort of, like, so Paul in the end says, like, the sexually immoral won't enter the kingdom. In the book of Revelation, it says the sexually immoral won't, and not just them, but, you know, that's, like, one of the groups of people, right? And so for me, it's just sort of a question of what then, like, defines morality, and then, you know, and then especially in light of, like, the gospel, which Paul says is the power of salvation for all people. And that's not just eternal life, and that's me getting some sort of ticket out of hell and into heaven, but like transforming my life now to be somehow a better and different person than I am. How, like, you know, does this somehow, I guess the side A, does it somehow lessen that power of the gospel when we fully affirm, rather than taking the side B approach, which both acknowledges and helps carry the burden? Is there some way that maybe side A is removing the snow, as you had said? Like, are we removing the struggle? Are we are we coddling? Are we, you know, because, like, I struggle with anxiety, I struggle with anger issues, and that's not to put those things on the same thing. I'm just saying, like, we have our thing, right? Like, we all have our thing that we, like, struggle with. So, I guess, yeah, that's just sort of kind of where I am, and if anyone wants to take a shot at that, then you know, feel free. Even you, you're not on the panel, but absolutely, you know.
We'll go down to. Do you want, Dr. Hemmings? Did you want to weigh in?
I was going to say that that question seems quite appropriate for Dr. Tunstall's address, whether tonight or on tomorrow afternoon. So, yes. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I think we hopefully you're patient enough to hold that question for tonight? Like, yeah, tonight or tomorrow afternoon. Yes.
Did you want to touch on Pastor Turner or Pastor? Yeah, it's a theological question, and so we will hold that for the next session. And as we go down, whoever has the mic, just a brief closing remarks as we wrap up. How can we create safe and affirming environments for LGBTQ plus on Adventist University campuses? Dr. Johnson.
Well, I tried to say it as eloquently as I could earlier, so I'll repeat it. And I believe this. Let us separate what we allow, and I'm using that word loosely, versus what we endorse. I think if we all are just allowing people to be who they are and supporting those individuals doesn't necessarily mean I totally embrace and endorse any and everything that you do and say. That's what I think we ought to do.
Oh, Dr. Johnson, I want to talk to you about that word endorse, but we're going to do that later.
It's not my word.
I know, but I want to, right, and I struggle. I just said it to the good Reverend Doctor next to me. In 30 seconds or less, we need to have a whole new conversation about what it means to be people made in the image of God. Yes. What does it mean to be people who made in the image of God, who continue the work of procreation. Because our current stance is that we're supposed to be able to get married. And everybody is not going to get married. Everyone, we know this already. And everyone has not been and will be able to have children. But there are technologies that will allow everyone who wants to be able to, whether they are queer or straight. And as someone who spends a lot of time with people talking about marriage, I often say, we like the idea of marriage, but when we look at what the biblical idea of marriage is, there's a struggle, right? And so because we are still on the sexual dimensions of our theological anthropology, we keep it to this very simple conversation about, I'm going to say it again, who gets to have sex and still be called a Christian. And God is bigger than that. This thing is bigger than that. If none of us had another baby, who could have? You know how many humans on this planet need a parent right now? And in our churches, we will not allow and support single, straight people or queer people from adopting? Because we want to have ours that have our eye anyway.
How do I come back after that? I think I would say, just after all the experiences I had with trying to get LGBT care groups off the ground and trying to get different initiatives that support LGBT people, I would implore our administrators to really keep in the forefront of their thoughts, yes, the constituents, but let's more so the people who are maybe a few moments away from committing suicide. That's where I think that the focus needs to be. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not an administrator. I know it's a lot more complex, but I'm tired of my life being no more important than deep pockets. That's the kind of messaging, at least, that it comes across to LGBT people. So let it be said of our Adventist institutions that in prioritizing reputation, we prioritize just as much a reputation of integrity, one in which we keep in the forefront those who tend to fall into the background.
I think that perhaps if we were to increase the dialogue between all persons concerned, that might help. If we were to increase the dialogue in an atmosphere of authenticity and with empathy, it might improve the situation. I think that perhaps we might want to recognize that even though we have different levels of beliefs and different understandings of the same issues, it doesn't help to create atmospheres in which people feel so dehumanized that they feel as if their lives don't matter. That's a serious thing. I think that God must value our lives very much. First of all, He created it, and then He died for it. And now He's putting out all His efforts to sustain it. Surely it must mean something. So I think we should increase our dialogue to the point where maybe we will understand each other better and perhaps get a better understanding of who God wants us to be.
The reason why I'm Seventh-day Adventist is because I believe that we have a beautiful doctrine, beautiful teaching. And I think that we need to be closer and explore the resources of our theology. Maybe just to mention Sabbath now. Sabbath for me is memento of grace. We are weekly, for a whole day, reminded that all that we have and all that we are comes from the grace of God. We did not deserve it. We did not merit it. It was given to us as a gift of grace. So how can people who are weekly reminded of grace can turn around and treat others in any other way except in a gracious way? It just does not make sense.
I'm tempted to yield my time for the next session, but I just want us to remember that as Seventh-day Adventist universities, we're supposed to be Christocentric. And there is Christocentrism and there's egocentrism, which is Paul made that distinction. I no longer live, but Christ lives. And we should not make that Christocentric claim just something we put on the books or speak about. But we must act it out in all of God's children that we find present on the campus. We all know they're present on our campus. I like to challenge the idea that perhaps there are more queer persons on this campus than on Southern campus. I'd like to challenge that idea. We must be aware that they're on our campus, that they suffer silently, those who don't come out, and those who come out perhaps suffer too. And so we must say, we see you, and we want to give you the spiritual care you need to overcome the existential crisis that society causes you to fall into. We cannot enter into that culture war outside in the world where that causes our queer people on campus to find themselves in these places where they suffer, where they want to commit suicide, where they hide, where some of them even become openly queerphobic, hiding their own beings. Let us be real and let us really model Christ. Let's not be afraid of truly being Christocentric.
Thank you to all of our panelists, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Brooks, Pastor Turner, and future Pastor Dr. Turner, Dr. Gordon, Professor Skur, and Dr. Hemmings. Before we close off, let's just have a quick word of prayer, and we will move on to the next part of our program. Father in heaven, thank you so much for the discussion. Thank you so much for this important topic. And Lord, as we converse and as we discuss how to be more inclusive, more Christocentric, more affirming, and Lord, we just want to ask that you would continue to guide our conversation, that you would be with us here as you have so far. Just continue to be glorified in the midst of all of this lectureship. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Give it up for our panelists. Thank you so much.